you're somebody who likes to take notes, on the back of the bulletin is a great place for you to do that this morning. Years ago, we were living in Tampa, and someone gave my wife, Dustin, and I tickets to the Strawberry Festival. How many of you guys know about the Strawberry Festival in Plant City? A lot of you, okay. So they'd given us these 2 tickets, and so one evening we decided we would go, and so we're walking down the midway of this great big fair, this carnival, and you know how those things are. There's rides over here and exhibits over here, and there's food everywhere. And so we're trying to decide, where we're going to gain most of our weight as we're walking down the midway. And we can't pick because there's so much to pick from, but something captured my attention. And so I want to show you on this slide. All of a sudden, I started hearing about Robinson's Racing Pigs. How many of you guys in here have heard of Robinson's Racing Pigs? Okay, hey, Rex, way to go. Rex and I are the only cultured people in this whole place, okay? Robinson's Racing Pigs, they have their own merchandise. They have their own theme song. They have their own arena where they race. They have little paddocks for each of the pigs. They have their own color, their own number. So suddenly, I'm just caught up in Robinson's Racing Pigs. Now I have to convince my wife, Dustin, that this is a bucket list must-see. That took a little bit of convincing, but sure enough, I got us into the arena, and as we're going in, the carnival barker is talking about these pigs. He's giving us their statistics, their won-loss records, how they've been doing from one season to the next. And he's trying to get the whole crowd excited. And he's asking us to pick one versus another and to cheer for our pig. So the whole moment builds up. I was amazed at how many people came and filled up this arena. And so we're sitting there with them. We picked our pig. Everybody picked their pig. And we start cheering, and the race starts. And they're racing. I mean, like crazy. And it comes to the end of the race, and the race is done, and guess what? It all stopped. The carnival barker stopped talking. The crowd quit cheering. Everybody just got up. They started walking off, and the pigs were all just standing there. Well, I gotta tell you, Brian was not ready to move on yet. There were some things I wanted to know, so I went over to one of the guys that worked there, and I said, hey, can I ask you some questions about this? He's like, sure. Like, what questions could you possibly ask? So I asked him some questions, and finally the question that I really wanted to ask him was, what does the winning pig get? He said, what do you mean? I said, what does the winning pig get at the end of the race? And he said, gets what everybody else, he gets what all of them get. And it crystallized for me in that moment. There's a lot in my life, a lot of times in my life where I've looked like one of those racing pigs. Where I think there's something special that I'm going for, there's something I'm gonna outdo everybody else, and I'm gonna get there, and there's a prize, and there's something, and there's nothing. Nothing different, nothing special. Now we call it the rat race. Now you can call it the pig race. It's just this endless, exhausting pursuit of what we think will be our great prize. And it ends up amounting to what everyone else ends up with. I want you to think about our life on this earth. Think of how many people have been or are searching. Think about the resources we expend, the time and the energy that we put forth in search of this true contentment. It's what Solomon's pondering in the first scripture that John read a few moments ago from chapter 2. The greatest experiment ever undertaken by humanity is the search for meaning. Our quest for the secret balance of success and enjoyment and contentment. And Solomon, who wrote portions of three of the books of the Old Testament, Solomon, in just a few verses, tries to sum up this great experiment in this 3,000-year-old book. That seems like a really good place for us to pause right now and pray. Would you pray with me, please? As ever, God, when one of your servants stands to speak, speak the loudest and the clearest to that servant. Amen. So Solomon finds himself in this moment where he says, I'm either going to allow eternity to be swallowed up in the immediate, or I'm going to allow the immediate to impact eternity. What's the point? He says, I've got to get this question answered for myself. What is the point of it all? Now, we're told that Solomon was an incredibly wise person, that he had the power of a king. He possessed the greatest accumulation of wealth and material in the world at that time. He lives on the right side of town. He lives in the right kind of house. He hangs out with the right kind of people. We hear it all in the words that he talks about, all of his accomplishments, all the stuff that he's built, the stuff that he's owned, the people that he has owned, the people that he has influenced, the wealth that he has amassed. And he allows us to walk with him through this mental checklist, this resume of accomplishments. And he admits to us that when he marks it and measures it, he never really found what he considered to be fulfillment, blessedness, satisfaction in any of it. I remember a conversation with our oldest son, Kelsey. He was getting ready to head off to college, so we're having one of those conversations about life and what's going to matter the most and what he's going to do and how he's going to do that. And we had this moment where he was kind of joking with me, and he said, you know, Dad, I know that things won't make me happy, but I would like to cry behind the wheel of a Ferrari just once. If we're honest, aren't we all there sometimes? We think about our life, we look at other people's lives, and we say, you know, I just like to trade my misery for their misery for just a moment. I know they've told me their life isn't all that, but I'd like to try it on if I could. Solomon tells us, don't bother. Solomon says the life that you have is your gift from God. Don't trade it for anyone else's, because their life is their gift as well. He summed it up in that third chapter that John read, those familiar words about timing and season. The writers call that a doublet, where you post and put one thing against another. For everything, there's a season and a time. The truth is that if the book of Ecclesiastes would have stopped 2.5 chapters in, Solomon would have concluded, what's the point? And wouldn't have written anything else. That's how he sums it up in verses 9 and 10. What do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. Solomon says, I've endured all kinds of things and I've thrived at things. I've been through all sorts of seasons and times in my life, and I've never found this true significance that I've been searching for. He says, but I've arrived at the answer. You see, what Solomon arrives at, what he's confronted with, what he's faced with, is forever. Forever is what he's been searching for. And I believe it's the same for many, if not all of us. We have this choice in life, And it's an either or choice. That's actually the second fill-in on your outline. We will either live life, Solomon describes it as under the sun, or we will live life under heaven. We will live life. He makes that clear. And it will be filled with all sorts of things, but we will either live it under the sun or under heaven. Now, what's interesting about the way that Solomon presents that to us, he gets to verse 11 and he says, this is what under heaven could look like. God has made everything beautiful in its time. And he has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. You see, Solomon's answer to his search for meaning brings him face to face with the everlasting, eternal, sovereign providence of God. God says, there is this thing called life, and I give it to you. What will you do with it? How will you leverage and live it? It's almost to me as if Solomon is looking forward and he hears the prophet Isaiah speaking from somewhere out in the future, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 8, when the prophet says, the grass withers, the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. It's either or, friends. We will either put all of our eggs in the withering, falling things of life that Isaiah talks about, or we will decide that God's goal for us is to live our best life, every moment of our lives, while we keep forever firmly in focus. That's our choice. On the back of your bulletin, there are about halfway down, two things that I want to point out to you. The first is a statement. It's one way to live our life. The depth and meaning of our lives are found only in what we can make of it. And there are people living their life that way. My life, my choices, my outcome, it's mine and it's about me. But there is an or. There's an option. There's something greater, deeper, that brings a sense of purpose to everything. It fills up everything in life with meaning. You see, God is our answer and our solution to meaninglessness in life. I want you to write that in there if that's your answer. It's the depth and the meaning of our lives only found in what we can make of it, or it is that God is our answer and our solution to meaninglessness in life. Listen to how he describes it in verses 12, 13, and 14. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. In other words, it's awesome for people to live their best life. He says that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Your life, my life, our gift from our God. But he says there's more than just living life. There's the why of life. Verse 14, I know that everything God does will endure forever. In other words, what we're doing right now can echo into eternity. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will, it says fear here, it means so that we will be in awe of him. Those moments in life when we're just in awe of God. Not what he does, but just who he is for us. Is there anybody here this morning that doesn't know that life is uncertain? All of us deal with the uncertainties of the life that we have lived or are living. But if life is uncertain, then not only is life not meaningless, I believe it's the exact opposite. If life is truly uncertain, then everything we have is more precious than we can realize or even fathom. Every moment, every relationship, every victory, every defeat, every success, every failure, every friend, every enemy, every illness, every healing, every life, every death. It's all wrapped up in this gift of life that comes to us from a God who loves us and says the life you have right now is about more than the life you have right now. You see, friends, when we come to understand that God is in control and not us, then it makes complete sense for us to take what we thought was in our tiny hands and lay it in God's great big hands. God, I can't make everything of my life that I believe you can. So I'm trusting my life. The life you've trusted to me, I trust to you. You see, that's the gift that God offers us when we reject living life under the sun and we choose instead to live, as Solomon says, under heaven. Real life begins for us when we begin to live life from the inside out, from the heart and the soul and the spirit out into the world. Solomon says it's eternity in our human hearts. Last week, Pastor Patino offered us the perspective that a forever life comes as a gift through the love of Jesus Christ. That Jesus' invitation is an invitation for everyone. Everyone's invited to hear and to respond. Everything and everyone matters. Nothing and no one is a throwaway. Now, I have to confess to you before I tell you this story that I'm not in any way an expert on the game of chess. I know the game of chess well enough to know what the moves are for the pieces, but I play chess like checkers. It's like one move at a time. You know, I always know the people sitting across from me, they've got the whole game figured out, and I'm just not quite there yet. What I know about chess is that the goal is to reach a place where either one side of the board has rendered the other side of the board's king helpless. It has no more moves. It's called checkmate, and when checkmate is called, the game is over. Well, there's a periodical that was written called the Columbia Chess Chronicle back in on August 18th of 1888. And the story in there was about a painting that was created by an artist named Friedrich Moritz August Retz. Now, this picture called Checkmate has been in private homes through the years. It's also spent time in the Louvre Museum in France. But the story is that there was a chess grandmaster, an American chess grandmaster named Paul Morphy. Paul Morphy was invited to come for dinner one evening in the home of Reverend R.R. Harrison, who somehow had managed to have in his possession this painting. Paul Morphy, the chess master, was drawn to the painting, had no idea that the pastor even had this painting, but he was drawn to it, and he began to look and examine the board. As you can see, the two who are playing chess, on the left side is Satan, who looks confident in the way that the game has been played to this point. On the other side, a man locked in deep despair, who believes that he has no move left, that the match is over, and what he will lose is his soul. Morphy continued to study the painting, and he kept being drawn into it. And he kept examining the moves that had already been made. And suddenly it dawned on him. And he said to everyone in the room, his king has one more move. It was a move that the man in the painting hadn't even realized was still able to be played. He thought that the game, the match was over, having no idea that there was a different outcome for his king than he ever imagined. Last Sunday, Pastor Patina showed us how Jesus fed thousands of people with 2 fish and some tiny loaves of bread. A crowd of people who had no idea how they would eat, who believed that the match was over. And yet Jesus the King said, no, I have another move. And Pastor Patina also encouraged us to walk with God's people in the desert, to walk out of Egypt, out into the desert. And in that moment when they couldn't figure out how they would eat or what they would drink, believing that there were no moves left to be played, and yet God, the King, said to Moses, tell the people, I have one more move. And so they ate and they drank. They ate food from the heavens and they drank water from the rock. And the God with one more move guided them all the way to what would be their new home. It happens over and over and over and over again in God's word. People who believed that they had nothing left, no life remaining, and yet God had another move in mind. So often in life, we look at the world that we live in, the mess that we often feel like we've made or that has been made all around us. We look at the wars, the violence, the pandemic, and how it just seems to never leave us. We look at the numbers of unemployed and frustrated, the struggling, those who are dealing with difficulties in their marriage, those who are battling depression, those dealing with isolation, the struggles that we are in the midst of in our nation, the racial divisions, divisions over sexuality and gender and what that all means for us. Church, what kind of life will you choose in the midst of the world that we live in? Is this all that there is? Or do you believe that God has a move that he has yet to play? See, church, we may live in a lost world, but that doesn't mean we have to live lost. Church, we may live in a world that is short on love, but that doesn't mean that we need to be any less loving. Church, we may live in a world that believes that the last move has been made, but we can choose to believe that the Creator God has at least one move left. That our lives are in his hands, and his hands only point us in one direction, and that direction is forever. And that's the truth.